Okay, so how are we doing? this, this person here is just like, fine, I'm fine, thank you very much. Come on, guys, like the energy is so low and it's not even lunch. How are we doing? Yay! Thank you. Okay, some of us, some non-humans are better than the humans in the room. So this panel is about artificial sexual relations, of which sex with robots is a small part. But don't worry, Pepper, because it says in the SoftBank terms and conditions that I have here that she or he cannot be used for acts for the purpose of sexual or indecent behavior or for the purpose of associating with unacquainted persons of the opposite sex. So basically, Pepper will be a useless wing robot. Anyway. So my name is Luke Robert Mason, and the aim of this year's festival is to blur the boundaries between possible futures, both multiple and parallel, alarming and disarming, utopian and dystopian. Ultimately, at events like this, we have an incredible opportunity to bury the 20th century and begin work on the 21st. So, let's begin. Once you go tech, there's no going back. At least that's the fear and sometimes the hope embodied in the idea behind artificial sexual relations. These new partners may take many forms, from the fully embodied robots designed in the image and likeness of us to devices that serve as a substitute for sexual organs. Whatever the form, their aim is to provide stimulation through simulation of human sexual relations. But this subject is about a harder rub, an increasing friction, a point of tension. Let me give you the climax that you want. Because ultimately, these new relationships might actually end up revealing something uncomfortable about human sexual desires. Truths that might force us to ask the following questions. When do things become persons? When do persons become things? How will human-robot relationships change our expectation of human to human relationships? And with this codification of sex, will we start to see the datification of pleasure responses? Are orgasm patterns unique? Are they impossible to duplicate or even replicate? Could your sexual response be the ultimate biometric identifier? Well, to help us answer some of these questions, or perhaps none of these questions, please put your hands together and welcome my incredible panel for this afternoon.
I want to learn more about sex.
Okay. That thing's going to drive me crazy. So today is the first day of possibly the most unsexy topic, which is GDPR. But what it does reveal to us is how we need to think about our data. And some of the devices that are being created, such as the work that Stephanie and Lisa is doing, Mystery Vibe, are looking at collecting data around our sexual response. And Stephanie, I want to ask you the question of, how do we need to rethink what it means to be able to collect data when we're collecting it from such intimate parts of our body? What does it mean to datify sex?
Interesting question. And yes, a final GDPR day. We're going to stop getting all those emails, finally. It's funny how somehow the most unsexy topic becomes very sexy. And one of the first things that people say when they hear the word smart sex toy is, oh, you're collecting data, and what if it's going to get hacked? Well, there are companies, including mine, looking at what it would mean to collect data. And it's interesting when you come from a sex perspective, because within, for example, the fetish and kink community, the idea of consent, which is essentially what GDPR is all about, has been such a core value that has been within that community for so long, and it's only just being brought into tech. So the idea that you should give informed, enthusiastic consent to whatever you're doing or collecting is a really interesting one for me. So not only should you know exactly what is being collected and how it's being processed or stored, but you should actively say yes. You shouldn't just be agreeing, you should be actively saying, yes, I want this, and I'm happy for you to do this. And it's interesting to see that kind of concept from sex now being brought into tech more broadly.
Now, the flip side of the datafication of sex is how we use data and certain expectations about sex to design these objects. And Sergey, you have a sex robot, sometimes you call it a doll, sometimes you call it a device, and you have this object that's been designed through certain expectations about what we want from sex. Could you explain how you've understood what it means to have sex and translated that to an object?
Thank you for the question. So basically, the algorithm I developed very long ago, and what I thought about human connections or interactions is that it has to do with many types of data. It's not just talking, it's the way you look as well. And one of the things that I thought is touch. Touch is very human, okay? So when you touch somebody, it can mean a million things. Somebody might touch you on the shoulder when you get your degree. This means something. If somebody dies in your family and they touch you here, it means something completely different, okay? So one touch is the same touch. It means a million things to a million people. So that gave me the opportunity, through sex, of getting to an algorithm that was, for me, can be very complex. So how can a humanoid understand what you're doing when you're touching and give you feedback as to whether that is going somewhere or not?
So we've always had this datafication of sex, whether we're using data to design devices or we're collecting data using these devices. But truly, this is something which isn't sitting with technology, is it? The datafication of sex is something we've always done as human beings.
Yep. Well, I was very lucky to observe a load of people who were creating their own sexual devices from the early sort of 90s and early connecting onto the internet. And the idea of how we play around with notions of our sexuality is also something that goes back into the annals of time. And women have always been datafying their bodies, because how else do they work out when they're going to have their period? When are they going to be ovulating? Also, farmers, the agricultural agrarian society would have to know when the lambs were going to be born. So we know about the cycles of our sexual behavior and our cycles of life. And I think with the whole digital society and the way we're looking at, say, virtual sex, we're able to play around with different areas of what stage in our sexual lives we are by looking at all this different kind of technology. And I must just do something a second. We've got an extra member of our panel that I haven't met. Hello, Pepper. Thank you. So, I mean, we project onto these objects. We project identities. We project ourselves onto these objects, too. So I think with the idea of sex, technology, virtual reality, robots, we're actually bringing a massive sexual history, which is actually exposing the way we look at ourselves, our identities, and how we actually communicate with each other.
And it's always been quite interesting in the sense that sex has been such a boundary pusher when it comes to technology, like especially from content side. The adult pornography has been such a driver of specific technologies. And I think when it comes to virtual reality, you're now seeing that with virtual reality pornography being one of the few areas where VR is actually making money. And now with robotics as well, you wonder, is like a genuine kind of conscious robot, is it going to come from like the sex angle, or is it going to come from something completely different?
Well, I'm thinking in terms of, we have robots that look like this, that we can sort of polish and clean. You might want to buy a robot in the future, and you take it to your garage on a Saturday to spray it down with oil and give it a polish. But if you've got
Foreplay.
an artificial human, you'd want to take them down the pub or take them out for dinner. but we are becoming more biotechnically physical. And when will you get to the point where you have the artificial human as opposed to the human and the robot? So we're looking at language and definitions.
Personally, I would say that long ago I thought that there'll be a transition. So now we're very interested in this Internet of Things. And sorry if I'm spoiling anything here, but I believe maybe there'll be a transition. People will want autonomous things. So something that you switch on and it works, and you know that it doesn't connect to anything. So I did that already on purpose. So I put everything inside the head, and as you switch on, that's it. So I don't have access to it. Nobody has access to it unless you actually physically go inside. Many people ask me to put like access to the internet, which is possible, of course, because everything is made to have access to the internet. But I think there'll be a transition. People will start saying, okay, so if I pay this money and then I run out of money and I start not having the money to pay for the internet connection, what happens to all my things? And also, okay, so do they know what this guy does? And if this doesn't work, what happens? So I think this type of, for example, robots like that, if you see a robot, it's not the same thing to know that it's fully autonomous as to know that there's somebody behind it, even on a database on the internet, controlling it. That is one thing. Yeah.
Well, Sergey, you've designed these very beautiful sort of objects that are in the image and likeness of the human body, but Stephanie, the work that you do is not concerned with making it look like a human biological organ, and there's very specific design choices that you've made for when you launched this product. I just wonder if you could inform us of what those design choices are.
Yeah, so we came up with the idea for Mystery Vibe as a concept about 9 years ago, and it came from, one aspect of it came from the fact that me and my co-founders used to walk past the shops in Soho in London, which were full of, at the time, very pink, very plastic, very penis-shaped products. And we just kind of, over the course of about a year, saw that there wasn't that much innovation technologically. And this was at the time when the first iPhone was coming out, so there was a lot of innovation happening, but it just wasn't happening in sexual accessories. And as we then started the company 5 or so years later, we went and we spoke to a ton of people, and we asked them a lot of questions. And one of them, especially when it came to women, was what kind of shapes do you enjoy? Like, or what kinds of shaped products would you like? And the resounding answer was not a penis. And it was interesting in that for a very long time as well, when you look at the past, the industry was very male-dominated in terms of who owned and was producing these products. And then as more women started to come into the industry, especially over the last, I'd say, 8 to 10 years, you started to see much more ergonomically designed, beautifully designed products that you could probably put on your mantelpiece or put on your bedside table, and people wouldn't really know what it was. So we've seen this design go from very genitalia to more kind of beautifully designed, very sleek luxury products. So it's interesting to see how we've gone from the more human to the more artificial, and yet that's what people are actually really wanting at the moment.
Well, this is nothing new, because truly, in some cases, people want the artificial. They don't want something that looks human. They've always wanted that. And I know you were there in the mid-90s, in the beginning of the cybersex movement, especially in the UK. And I just wonder if you can tell us about semi-female shaped objects and DIY fuck piñatas.
Oh, yes, DIY fuck piñatas. Excuse my language. People make things in their bedrooms. They do. They order things on the internet, and they turn them into something that they shouldn't really be used for. So I studied this group of people who were basically getting different types of inny-outy, inserty devices and making them and attaching themselves to these. They made their own servers and invited people onto the server to touch their body remotely with different vibrating sensors. And I was watching these guys, and I was quite worried that they were going to electrocute themselves. There was no health and safety. But it was fantastic to watch them, and they created their own sexual identities using a spark plug and cables and all this kind of stuff. So it becomes really interesting when I've searched all sorts of people, and there's somebody who actually made his sex robot, artificial woman, out of papier-mâché, 2 balloons, And he would cut the different faces out the front of magazines like Cosmopolitan and stick them on the head. So he had a different woman every week with his magazine face. And unfortunately, for the actual female genitalia, he used a rubber glove inside out and glued it on the doll, the fuck piñata. So people will want to have sex, and they will make some way of having it. And I think the way that technology is developing, the way things are just so malleable, and there's emerging technology coming out every week, I think we're going to see some amazing things coming in the future. And I'm just sad that I'm getting a bit old and past it, because I'd love to find out what else is coming. What are you going to make?
First of all, if you're working under 24 volts, you're fine. You
Right.
can even touch it with your tongue.
Oh,
So it's fine.
right.
But it needs to be DC 24. DC 96 volts, it might kill you.
Oh,
But they don't do that. That's why it's illegal. Another thing that's, for me, very interesting, other than the data is very interesting, right? But I think that it's not just points of data. It's about, with a set of data, you can do many things, because it increases almost factorially, right? What you can do, factorial means a very large number with very few points of data. But another thing is what I've experienced doing this is that people might want the full humanoid, not just for the penetration, and not because it has big boobs or things like that. I've noticed that people like to see, oh, I want to experience the hand, just touch the hand, be able to feel the skin, and then somehow this issue that people say, oh, why do you want a sex robot to tell you jokes? Because this is a way, when you have sex, to have formed a relationship in a way that there was a background. And I think what attracts people to it is the background, not just the sex. Otherwise, you can buy just not simpler because it's easy, because it might have a lot of technology, but a smaller device, say.
with something like virtual reality that's coming at the moment, this is some stuff I'm working on at the minute, is the idea that I could take on a male identity, for example, in virtual space. If you're looking at proper digital space, not 3D movies, we're looking at real digital virtual reality constructed spaces. I could have a penis. I could look down and see a penis. Now, would I have phantom penis sensations? And how could you really play around with those notions of the phantom body? And, I mean, I just can't wait to do that, actually, to see what it'd be like. Anyway, sorry.
So, I mean, Stephanie, I wonder if that's on your roadmap. Are you looking, what is the future of Mystery Vibe? Are you looking to combine it with virtual space? Are you looking to explore new forms of materiality, maybe synthetic biology and self-lubricating bacterial materials to make these sorts of devices?
Well, one of the things we have just done is released a new product, which is a wearable vibrator for men called Tenuto. So check it out. We literally released it last week, so it's very new. But I think we are definitely going down that kind of IoT type route, whereas if you kind of can map the idea of pleasure and map arousal, then you can start to curate content for that. So you could create an experience rather than just a physical product. And I think your point on disassociating sex with penetration, I think, is a very important one as well. And we should be looking at how we can have more intimacy with our partners or with ourselves through technology, and using technology as that tool to have that greater connection or intimacy. But yeah, I think there's so many opportunities in this space.
So although I'm being told we're over time, I think we have 5 minutes for audience questions, and we have some audience questions from Slido. I think they're going to put them up on the screens, and I think those are the questions from the last. Here's a wonderful one. So Catherine asks something that's now refreshing. So Catherine asks, what's your opinion on virtual porn and the positive and negative impacts it'll have on human relationships? I think that gets to the crux of a lot of the concern people have over this. Will we replace humans with either virtual partners or robotic partners? People feel very upset about the idea of becoming obsolete in the bedroom. So I wonder how quickly that obsolescence is coming.
I think virtual reality pornography, 3D pornography, is just a massive industry. And no matter what way you want to think about it, it's a way of having some kind of entertainment, or I call it sextertainment. So you've got quite a new industry of young women that are making 3D pornographic films that specialize from the woman's viewpoint, because most of the 3D pornography you get at the moment is you're a bloke and you've got some woman jumping about or an orgy in front of you, and you can't participate, you're just there, but you can look around. But with the advent of virtual reality pornography, I think we'll be able to make a more sophisticated experience, because otherwise it's just something that's kind of a bit tacky. But I think we're going to be able to look at more of erotic experiences and longer kinds of narratives and building up different relationships with our digital fantastic people. We all have love maps that we create to think about how we're going to engage in relationships. And I think not 3D pornography, but virtual reality pornography will be a way of actually expanding and trying out those love maps.
And I think you hit on a very important point there. There are absolutely potential negative impacts on human relationships, but what is most important is that we have a real diversity of voices and of people creating and starring in these things. At the moment, it's very towards one end, but I think if we have a more diverse set of people creating content, and one of the most equality-focused and feminist things you can do at the moment is find a kind of pornography producer, pay for it, find a producer that is paying their stars well, paying everyone properly, and has a diverse team creating stuff, pay for your pornography. A very feminist thing to do.
Yeah, my point about that is that, well, maybe it's not exactly answering the question, but it's mostly psychology, I would say, because sometimes I hear, because I'm not an expert in sexuality, okay? I don't know everything that there is. I'm not an expert, but personally, I think that the mechanical, many times people talk about, yesterday I was in a talk, they were talking about mechanically teaching how to do sex. I think that people, there may be many types of people, but there are people that are very psychological, and you like somebody more because of what you think of the person than because of. So you desire somebody because of what that person projects as a person. So many people, if they go for the robot, it's because of what the robot projects. So it needs to have a personality, psychology, all these things. Other mechanical things, whether it does it well or not, it is tight or not tight, these things, I think sometimes it might not be so important. For some people, I'm not an expert, but that's why I think.
And there's another wonderful question on there, which is about who's at the leading edge of innovation. That just jumps off my slide there. So where do you think in the world? I know, Steph, you travel a lot around the world. You see a lot of these devices being developed, both in the East and the West. And Trudy, you've seen all sorts of things across your time in the world of cybersex. And I wonder, Sergio, is there anything that you've seen out in the world where you go, that is the perfect thing that I would love to bring back and design? So who do you think is at the leading edge of innovation when it comes to changing our notions of sex?
You ask me? Okay, so basically I think sometimes we say we act too little and we do too much. Sorry, we think too little and we do too much. In this case, in my opinion, we're talking too much and we're doing too little. In my opinion, the Chinese are just working. There's factories there, over 20, with sex dolls, and these guys are putting a lot of money. So the West world, the Westerners, we are talking about the ethics behind it, these things. These guys don't care, seriously. I've been to the factories, mostly in Guangzhou. There's about 20 there. They do it by trial and error, and they take the actual data from what they sell, because these guys are selling. So in other words, the robot will be done. Technically, it can be done, but it requires to be done in a way. For example, the robot I have, it's X money, yeah, X $1,000. If I did it mass-produced, this could be down to $1,000 or less. This is when people will buy it. So it's expensive now. What I do is too expensive because I'm doing it personally. If it was done in a factory, the price goes down by 10, and then is when people will buy it. So people are not buy it mostly, people that don't buy it mostly, is because of the money that they have to spend, and the humanoid, because you need to hide it. So it's big, and you don't want people to see it. So when you don't mind the people, I have it as a statue. The Romans used to have statues, right? I think Michelangelo, if he came back, he would do a statue with the silicone. Is what I think.
And while you sit on that, where do you think in the world there's the most innovation in the cybersex or the teledildonic space right now?
I think it's coming from all over. There's some stuff happening in the US that is really interesting. London is a really great hub. There's stuff happening in Barcelona, and then, of course, in China. But for me, the most interesting stuff is being created around the intimacy and the non-penetration stuff. And yeah, I'm really excited to help people experience more pleasure and explore themselves more.
And Trudy, where do you think this is all going to end
If
up?
we think about Mark Zuckerberg doing stuff as a student and coming up with something like Facebook, I'm fairly certain there's going to be one person who's going to make something in their garage or in their bedroom, which is going to be networked, it's going to be virtual, and it's going to come out of the blue. And who knows where that's going to be, but there's going to be somebody somewhere who's going to be a mad enthusiast, and they're going to come up with our next sex product.
Yeah, so on that note, let me end with a quick warning, because we're talking a lot about the future at this conference, and it should always come with a notional warning. Let me end with this. The future is always virtual, and some things that may seem imminent or inevitable never actually happen. Fortunately, our ability to survive the future isn't predicated on our capacity for prediction, although, and sometimes in those much more rare occasions, something remarkable does come of staring the future deep in the eyes and challenging everything that it seems to promise. I hope you feel you've done that while listening to this panel. Please join me in thanking these incredible panelists. Thanks.